In the aftermath of the failed Catilinarian conspiracy, Cicero, as consul, convened a debate on how to deal with the imprisoned men who had allegedly plotted his murder and the overthrow of the Roman state. The prevailing view in the Senate was that they should be executed without trial, for their treason was so insidious as to negate the protections that they were owed as not just citizens, but members of some of the most prominent families in the Republic. This debate took an unexpected turn when a young noble named Caius Julius Caesar inveighed against the forming consensus by advocating for something new and virtually unknown in the ancient world: long-term imprisonment. To support this as the proposed sentence, he injected theology and philosophy into what had been a fairly pragmatic debate. Caesar, influenced by Epicureanism, stated that since there was no life after death, a worse punishment for the accused would be to face a life of imprisonment rather than be granted the quick release of death. So far as the penalty is concerned, I can say with truth that amid grief and wretchedness, death is a relief from woes, not a punishment, that it puts an end to all mortal ills, and leaves no room either for sorrow or for joy. A semblance of this speech is preserved by Sallust, who records that it made a strong impression on the Senate, and would have moved the body to reconsider the sentence had Caesar's arch-rival Cato not taken to the floor and delivered an impassioned defense of the death sentence by also leveraging theological and philosophical arguments. As Cato was Caesar's antithesis in all things, he delivered the perspective of the Stoic school to refute Caesar's belief in a lack of existence after death. To Cato, there was certainly some form of life after death. He believed that the wicked would be punished. In fine and finished phrases did Gaius Caesar a moment ago before this body speak of life and death, regarding as false, I presume, the tales which are told of the lower world, where they say the wicked take a different path from the good, and dwell in regions that are gloomy, desolate, unsightly, and full of fears. To Cato, this was all the more reason that the conspirators had to receive the ultimate penalty. He railed against Caesar's corruption of traditional beliefs, a critique that was all the more pointed as Caesar had just won election to the office of Pontifex Maximus, making him the chief priest of Roman state religion. This was the first high-profile clash between the two, and Cato would emerge victorious, as the men were executed without trial. But Cato's triumph came at a cost, as Caesar would have the last laugh. It is said also that when the great conspiracy of Cataline, which came near overthrowing the city, had come to the ears of the Senate, Cato and Caesar, who were of different opinions about the matter, were standing side by side, and just then a little note was handed to Caesar from outside, which he read quietly. But Cato cried out that Caesar was outrageously receiving letters of instruction from the enemy. At this, a great tumult arose, and Caesar gave the missive, just as it was to Cato. Cato found, when he read it, that it was a wanton bit of writing from his sister Servilia, and, throwing it to Caesar with the words, "Take it, thou sot," turned again to the business under discussion. So notorious was Servilia's passion for Caesar. It has long been a personal theory of mine that Caesar arranged for the delivery of this ultimately trivial, yet apparently spicy love letter to coincide with the timing of his debate with Cato, to humiliate his opponent. Caesar, after all, did nothing without a purpose. The fascinating nature of this well-preserved debate shines a light on how, just like us moderns, what one believes about life after death will naturally affect how we live and the decisions we make. Whether we expect to face oblivion or a happy and peaceful hereafter, our decisions and values are shaped by what we believe occurs on the other side of the death we all know is inevitable. The theologies and philosophies that we adopt may initially appeal to us as a way to interpret the world in various ways. Their point, however, is to help us change it. But focusing too much on the real-world implications also means that we risk missing the forest for the trees. For the very fact that there were different positions here at all helps to illustrate the complexity of the Roman religious worldview, and the diversity of acceptable positions within it. There is a temptation to oversimplify and state that Romans believed all religions were in some sense true, and that all gods were valid in some form. While correct to an extent, taking this too far risks paving over the contradictions and differences that Romans also believed existed. There may have been a great degree of social religious consensus on many issues, but Romans knew that in areas where the rubber met the road, so to speak, there was uncertainty and disagreement. Something had to happen after death, and the people of the ancient Mediterranean argued endlessly over whether it was pure annihilation, reincarnation, or eternal bliss. This video will deal with prevailing views in Rome during the late Republic and early Principate, as it is among the best attested periods. But we must note that the injection of Hellenic culture into Rome beginning in the 2nd century BCE resulted in considerable evolution and reevaluation of earlier Roman views. Accordingly, understanding the more developed Roman perspective in the era we are covering requires that we start with Greek sources, not earlier Roman traditions. The best sources for understanding early Greek views on the afterlife are the Homeric epics, which took on a role not incredibly dissimilar from that played by the Bible in the modern Western tradition, providing a well of rich imagery and illusions that operated as an ambient, omnipresent cultural background, even for those who did not take its words literally. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, life after death is a certainty, but it is a rather grim affair. Those consigned to Hades lack a real corporeal substance and persist as pale shadows of their former selves. Even the great hero Achilles would rather be the lowest of the low among the living than king of Hades. Nay, speak not to speak soothingly to me of death, glorious Odysseus. I should choose, so I might live on earth, to serve as the hireling of another, of some portionless man whose livelihood was but small, rather than to be lord over all the dead that have perished. This bleak vision of the afterlife would be heavily rebuked by the philosophy of Plato, a man who sought to rewrite all aspects of Homeric theology, to the point that he even wanted to ban the poet for his antiquated writing regarding the gods. The Platonic tradition was highly dualist and taught that mankind bore immortal, non-material souls, which were separated from our bodies at death. To him, therefore, death represented the soul's liberation and potential return to the world of forms. In this view, the afterlife was not sorrowful at all, but a welcome ascent, especially for those who had spent their lives cultivating their philosophical wisdom. It is very easy to discern just how significantly this perspective has persisted, even down to the present. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. Plato's teachings on the immortality of the soul and a blessed existence for the wise would be echoed by Romans such as Cicero. The souls of men, at their departure from the body, took different roads. For those which were polluted with vices that are common to men, and which had given themselves up entirely to unclean desires, and had become so blinded by them as to have habituated themselves to all manner of debauchery and profligacy, or to have laid detestable schemes for the ruin of their country, took a road wide of that which led to the assembly of the gods. But they, who had preserved themselves upright and chaste, and free from the slightest contagion of the body, and had always kept themselves as far as possible at a distance from it, and whilst on earth had proposed to themselves as a model the life of the gods, found the return to those beings from which they had come an easy one. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, writing a century later, would take this idea to its logical conclusion, portraying the soul as something that migrated here from the heavens and was returned on our death. Thus, death was no cause for worry, as this mortal life was really only a preparation for our eternal reward. This Stoic view is what gave Cato the resolve he needed to face death with dignity, rather than submit to Caesar's pardon. We must recall that the last book he ever read as he contemplated the ethics of taking his own life was Plato's Phaedo, which discussed the immortality of the soul. The Epicurean school that influenced Caesar also taught its adherents that death was not to be feared, but not because one would now experience eternal happiness, but rather because one would experience nothing at all. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us, for good and evil imply awareness, and death is the privation of all awareness. Therefore, a right understanding that death is nothing to us makes the mortality of life enjoyable, not by adding to life an unlimited time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. For life has no terror for those who thoroughly apprehend that there are no terrors for them in ceasing to live. Foolish, therefore, is the person who says that he fears death, not because it will pain when it comes, but because it pains in the prospect. Whatever causes no annoyance when it is present, causes only a groundless pain in the expectation. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death is not come, and when death is come, we are not. It is nothing, then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer. We can perceive the influence of this line of thinking on Caesar in his position regarding the conspirators, but also in his statement that the ideal death would be quick and unexpected, a statement delivered ironically enough on the eve of his assassination. Though Epicureanism would not receive the same level of support as Stoicism, at least among the elite who provide our sources, the popularity of the epitaph, "I was not, I was, I am not, I care not," on Roman graves indicates that his influence on this matter at least was widespread. For despite the official philosophical schools and theological traditions of the elite, there always existed countercurrents at the popular level. Archaeological evidence shows that the average person was not concerned with philosophical consistency and felt free to mix and match the traditions that appealed to them. The presence of grave goods and depictions of an afterlife filled with activities, such as feasting, show that to the average Roman, the afterlife was not perceived as a place of somber, or even sober, philosophical reflection. Though still heavily influenced by Greek and Eastern thought, perhaps the belief that took on the most distinctively Roman character from the entire Mediterranean milieu of conjectures on post-mortem existence was the belief in the apotheosis, or divinization, of certain moral exemplars. Typically an honor reserved for emperors, this practice had precedent in the mythic Greek figures of Dionysus and Heracles, but was extended to the legendary Roman founder Romulus at a very early date. Though the barrier to entry into the divine realm appears to have been quite high initially, the introduction of the principate regime severely relaxed these standards, with Caesar divinized soon after his assassination, and the Julio-Claudians easing the transition further to leverage the political utility of a divine emperor figure, so they could further centralize political and religious authority under the Imperial Cult. In fact, the practice would become so commonplace and predictable for emperors that Seneca wrote a satire of Claudius's apotheosis titled "The Pumpkinification of the Divine Claudius," mocking the new godhood of the lackluster emperor. The later Flavian emperor Vespasian even wryly joked on his deathbed by saying, "I think I am becoming a god." One must wonder if any of those celebrating Caesar's divinization, or who took part in the inauguration of his temple, wondered how the man who believed in no afterlife would feel about the cult springing up around him and depicting him as enjoying a blessed post-mortem existence alongside the gods. But, despite the official position of the Roman state after his assassination, we must note that Caesar, like Cato, got the death he had wanted in life. For Cato, it was an opportunity to firmly show the world that he valued his convictions more than his own life, to prove definitively that he would abide by his Stoic principles no matter the cost. For Caesar, it was an end he could never have seen coming, and a quick moment of terror before shuffling off this mortal coil. We can't know the ultimate fates of these men after death, but we do know that their lives have made their legacies immortal.